Loved by his fans, hated by many opponents, Börje Salming didn't just play hockey, he changed it forever. He was the Swedish pioneer who proved that European players could survive and even dominate in the brutal world of North American hockey. But that kind of respect didn't come easy. He earned it through bruises, blood, and battles against some of the toughest men ever to lace up skates. From Ken Linseman's trash talk to Gillies' flying elbows to the silent, nasty rivalry with Bobby Clarke, Salming faced every kind of cheap shot imaginable and gave it right back. These weren't just opponents, they were challenges. Every fight, every slash, every glare from across the ice tested his pride and toughness. Through it all, Börje refused to back down. He took every hit and turned it into fuel. That's how a kid from Kiruna became a Maple Leafs legend and a Hockey Hall of Famer. Because as Salming once said, villains aren't born, they're built, and the men who tried to break him, they ended up building him instead. Here are the 6 rivalries that turned Börje Salming from an experiment into an icon. This story matters because being hated is what made Börje Salming great. In the rough 1970s NHL, every slash, shove, and insult from these 6 rivals pushed him to fight harder, skate faster, and never back down. Without them, he might have been just another talented Swede. Because of them, he became a legend, the toughest Swede ever to play the game. By the end, you'll see how rivalry, pain, and pure determination built Salming's legacy, and how 6 names turned him into hockey immortality. Bobby Clarke, the slash that drew first blood. In the 1970s, few players represented hockey toughness more than Bobby Clarke, captain of the Philadelphia Flyers, the team everyone called the Broad Street Bullies. They played mean, hard, and often over the line. When Börje Salming came over from Sweden, Clarke and the Flyers saw him as the perfect target, a test case for whether a European could survive in their brutal world. From the very first time they met on the ice, Clarke went after him. The chirps, the elbows, the sneaky slashes behind the play, all designed to break Salming's will. Most players would have backed off. Salming didn't. He stared down Clarke and took every hit as a challenge. Then came that unforgettable night in 1976. Midway through a heated game, Clarke's stick came down hard across Salming's arm, a slash so loud it echoed through the arena. Fans gasped, but Salming didn't flinch. He didn't even fall. He just looked Clarke straight in the eye, then kept skating like nothing happened. It wasn't bravado, it was message sent. After the game, reporters surrounded him asking if he was angry or hurt. Salming just smirked and said, "He'll try it once." One short sentence that spoke volumes. He wasn't scared and he wasn't going anywhere. That moment changed everything. To the Flyers, he was no longer the soft Swede. To the rest of the league, he became proof that European players could take the punishment and still fight back. That slash became a symbol. The day Börje Salming earned respect the hard way. From then on, Clarke was more than just an opponent. He was a ghost that haunted Salming's rise. The man who drew first blood and unknowingly helped forge the myth of one of the toughest defensemen in NHL history. That single battle didn't just start a rivalry, it started a movement. Every European who came after owed a small debt to that slash. Because Börje Salming stood tall, took it, and changed hockey forever. Ken Linseman, the pest he couldn't ignore. If you played hockey in the 1980s, you knew Ken Linseman by his nickname, the Rat. He wasn't the biggest guy, but he was a master at getting under your skin. Linseman didn't just play hockey, he played mind games. And when he faced Salming, he found his favorite target. Every shift was a war of words and sticks. Linseman would slash at Salming's ankles, jab at his ribs, or sneak in an elbow when the ref looked away. Then he'd grin and chirp, saying things like, "Go back to Sweden, you don't belong here." For a long time, that was the kind of talk Salming had to endure. The idea that Europeans weren't tough enough for the NHL. But Börje wasn't built to back down. He let it slide once, maybe twice. Then came the night he snapped. During a face-off, Linseman leaned in and whispered that same line, "Go back to Sweden." The next moment, Salming's stick came up hard, cross-checking Linseman square in the chest. The Rat went flying. The crowd exploded, and every player on the ice suddenly realized that Börje Salming wasn't someone to mess with. It wasn't a pretty play. It wasn't graceful or elegant like Salming's usual style. But it was real. It was raw, and it earned him something even better than applause. Respect. After that night, the locker room saw him differently. He wasn't just the smooth skating Swede with the perfect breakout pass. He was a warrior who could dish it out when provoked. Linseman had tried to expose Salming's weakness, and instead revealed his edge. That face-off became legendary in Toronto. It was the moment when Börje proved that toughness doesn't have an accent. And for Ken Linseman, the Rat he couldn't ignore, it was the night he realized that the Swede he mocked could hit harder, and bite back even harder. Gillies, the Islander who made him bleed. When the Toronto Maple Leafs faced the mighty New York Islanders of the late 1970s, it wasn't just a hockey game, it was a war. The Islanders were building a dynasty loaded with talent and muscle. At the center of that muscle was Clarke Gillies, a powerhouse winger known for his fists, his fearlessness, and his ability to make life miserable for anyone who dared to cross him. Gillies played clean most nights, but when the stakes rose, he was ruthless. He saw Börje Salming, the smooth skating Swede with the flowing hair, as the perfect target to send a message. Skill alone wouldn't win this battle. The Leafs needed their star defenseman to stand tall, but the Islanders wanted to break him first. Then came that unforgettable playoff night. The puck dropped, tempers flared, and in one chaotic collision near the boards, Gillies' elbow caught Salming square across the forehead. The crowd gasped as Börje fell, blood pouring down his face. Trainers rushed in. The white ice turned red. He needed stitches, a lot of them. Most players would have called it a night, but not Salming. Just one shift later, he was back on the ice, face wrapped, eyes burning with defiance. He skated past the Islanders' bench, the blood still visible through the bandages. The crowd erupted. That moment, the Swede with the crimson mask refusing to quit, became one of the most iconic images in Maple Leafs history. Even the Islanders respected him after that. Gillies himself, years later, admitted he'd never seen anything like Salming's courage that night. The elbow might have made him bleed, but it didn't break him. It made him legendary. From that game on, Börje wasn't just a skilled European defenseman, he was something rarer, a warrior who proved that heart and grit could come from anywhere. Clarke Gillies made him bleed, but in doing so, he helped make Börje Salming immortal. Terry O'Reilly, the Boston Brawler. Whenever the Toronto Maple Leafs faced the Boston Bruins in the late 70s and early 80s, it wasn't hockey, it was mayhem. The Garden crowd was wild, the hits were brutal, and leading the charge for Boston was Terry O'Reilly, the ultimate grinder with a short fuse and endless energy. He wasn't just a player, he was chaos on skates. O'Reilly played the game like a street fight. He crashed, shoved, and swung at anything in blue and white, and Börje Salming quickly became one of his favorite targets. Every time Salming touched the puck, O'Reilly was right there, slashing his stick, chirping in his ear, daring him to retaliate. And for a while, Börje didn't. He was focused on skating, on skill, on proving Europeans could play smart hockey. But everyone has a breaking point. One night in Boston, the game boiled over. A scrum in front of the net turned ugly. Sticks were flying, gloves were off, and Salming found himself face to face with O'Reilly, one of the league's most feared brawlers. The crowd roared, expecting the Swede to back off. He didn't. Salming dropped his gloves and stood his ground. The two went at it, short, furious, and loud. When it was over, both men were breathing hard, jerseys torn, pride intact. Salming looked at O'Reilly and said quietly, "You fight once, you never have to again." That line stuck with O'Reilly. From that night on, he stopped taking cheap shots at Börje. The respect was earned, not through words, but through pain and courage. For Salming, that fight wasn't about winning or losing, it was about belonging. He proved he could play the North American way on his own terms. After Boston, nobody questioned his toughness again. In a league full of bruisers, Börje Salming stood tall, and even the Boston Brawler learned some players don't need to start fights to finish them. Darryl Sittler, the teammate who tested him. Every great team has fire, and in the 1970s, few burned hotter than the Toronto Maple Leafs. At the center of that fire were two men, Börje Salming and Darryl Sittler. Both were superstars, both were proud, and both refused to settle for anything less than greatness. They were brothers in battle, leaders in the locker room, and sometimes rivals in spirit. Sittler was the captain, emotional, outspoken, and the heart of the Leafs. Börje was the warrior, quiet, unshakable, and the backbone of the defense. Together, they carried the team through some of its most memorable seasons, but when things went wrong, their passion often clashed. It happened one night after a brutal playoff loss. The Leafs had given everything, but it wasn't enough. The locker room was heavy with silence until someone, maybe a reporter, maybe a teammate, made a careless comment about effort. That's when it exploded. Sittler, red-faced with frustration, slammed his stick and started shouting about accountability. Börje fired back, angry and exhausted, his Swedish accent cutting through the noise. Helmets flew, sticks crashed, and suddenly the quiet defender and the fiery captain were in a shouting match that froze the entire room. No punches were thrown, but the energy was electric, raw, and real. Players later said you could feel the walls shake. When it ended, both men stood there breathing hard, surrounded by scattered gear, the only sound the hum of the lights. Then Sittler nodded once, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. Börje sat down, ran a hand through his hair, and just stared at the floor. That moment could have divided them, but instead, it forged something deeper. The next night, both men hit the ice like nothing had happened, skating harder, blocking more shots, refusing to quit, because that's what leaders do. They don't have to agree, they just have to care. For Börje, that clash was a lesson. Leadership isn't about being liked, it's about being real. It's about holding yourself and your teammates to a higher standard, even when it hurts. Darryl Sittler didn't just test Börje Salming's patience, he tested his pride. And in that fire, both men proved why they were the beating heart of the Maple Leafs. Bobby Orr, the idol turned rival. Before Börje Salming ever stepped foot in the NHL, he already knew the name Bobby Orr. To a young defenseman growing up in Sweden, Orr was a superhero, the perfect mix of skill, power, and grace. Salming studied his every move on the limited game footage he could find. To him, Orr wasn't just the best player in the world, he was the standard every defenseman dreamed of reaching. So when Börje finally made it to the NHL and found himself lining up across from his childhood idol, it was surreal. He wasn't facing an enemy. He was facing a living legend. But in the competitive fire of the league, admiration only lasts until the puck drops. From the very first shift, Salming realized just how hard it was to keep up with Orr. The Boston defenseman moved like no one else. Fast, fluid, effortless. Every rush felt like a storm. But instead of being intimidated, Börje was inspired. He didn't want to hurt Orr. He wanted to outplay him, to show that a Swede could skate with the greatest. Each time they met, Salming pushed himself a little harder. He studied Orr's gaps, his transitions, the way he read plays before they happened. It wasn't just a rivalry of skill. It was a battle of pride and evolution. Salming wanted to prove that the European game could match the North American ideal Orr represented. Years later, Salming admitted, "Orr was the one I wanted to beat most. Not because he hated him, but because he respected him so deeply. Orr was the benchmark, the mountain he needed to climb to validate his own place in hockey history." Their encounters were short-lived. Orr's knees gave out before the rivalry could fully bloom. But the lesson stayed with Salming for life. While facing his idol forced him to find another gear, a mix of grace and grit that became his trademark. It wasn't hate born of anger. It was competitive reverence, sharpened into obsession. Börje Salming didn't want to destroy Bobby Orr's legacy. He wanted to join it. And in his own way, he did. If Clarke lit the match, Linseman was the gasoline. And when Gillies made him bleed, the legend finally took form. From rivals to teammates, from idols to enemies, the hate became fuel. Every clash, every scar, every roar from the crowd added another layer to the myth. And when the gloves dropped in Boston, respect was earned in pain. By the time he faced Orr, the circle was complete. From student to equal, from admirer to rival. Hockey's villains and heroes are born in the same fire. For Börje Salming, those 6 names weren't enemies. They were teachers. Each one tested his courage, his patience, and his pride. They forced him to harden, to lead, and to redefine what a European could be in the NHL. Strip away the headlines, the blood, the booze, and you find a man who simply refused to blink. He wasn't chasing glory. He was proving a point. Hate, it was respect, flipped upside down. Fierce, loud, and loyal. Hate is just respect in reverse. Loud, loyal, and obsessed. So, who's the real villain of your era? The player you love to hate? Drop your pick and your flashpoint below.